Before you judge, listen closely at my son's wedding. My father-in-law spilled wine on me, laughed, and called me useless. The burgundy stain spread across my dress like blood while his cruel laughter echoed through the ballroom. What he didn't know was that I controlled $74 million through anonymous holdings. That very night, as Charleston's elite celebrated around us, I made a choice that would leave everyone speechless. This isn't just about revenge, it's about what happens when you underestimate a widow who's been silent for too long. My name is Claire Donovan, and I've learned that silence can be the most powerful weapon a woman possesses. The chandeliers at the Charleston Harbor Resort cast golden light across the reception hall, illuminating faces flushed with champagne and false smiles. I sat at table 12, strategically placed just far enough from the main table to signal my irrelevance to the Whitmore family hierarchy. The wedding had been beautiful. I suppose. My son Michael looked handsome in his tailored tuxedo, though his smile never quite reached his eyes when he glanced my way during the ceremony. Emily, his bride, glowed in her $40,000 Vera Wang gown, a detail her mother Vivian had mentioned no fewer than 6 times during cocktail hour. I smoothed my simple navy dress, a modest piece I'd chosen deliberately. Let them think what they wanted. Let them assume the widow Donovan barely scraped by, that I counted pennies and clipped coupons. The truth lived in encrypted servers and offshore accounts. In patent documents and quarterly reports, they'd never think to connect to the quiet woman nursing a single glass of white wine. The band shifted to a slower melody when Harold Whitmore approached my table. My father-in-law, though the term felt like acid on my tongue, carried himself with the swagger of a man who'd never been told no. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his burgundy tie matching the wine he swirled in his crystal glass. "Claire," he said, my name dripping with condescension. "Enjoying yourself, I know these events must be overwhelming for someone in your position." I looked up at him, keeping my expression neutral. "It's a lovely reception. Harold." He laughed, that sharp bark I'd come to despise over the past 3 years since Michael had married into his family. "Lovely. Yes. Well, we Whitmores know how to throw a proper celebration. Not like those backyard barbecues you people probably consider fancy." You people. As if I were some separate species, not the mother of his son-in-law. Harold moved closer, ostensibly reaching for the bottle of Chateau Margaux on my table. His movements were theatrical, exaggerated. I should have seen it coming. The glass in his hand tilted, almost in slow motion, and suddenly burgundy wine cascaded across my lap, soaking through the fabric, pooling on the white tablecloth. The conversation at nearby tables stuttered to a halt. Heads turned. Someone gasped. Harold's laughter boomed across the sudden silence. "Oh dear, how clumsy of me." But his eyes glittered with malice, not apology. "Maybe next time you'll wear something worth ruining." The laughter that followed wasn't universal, but it was enough. Vivian's tinkling giggle from the main table, Emily's poorly hidden smirk behind her manicured hand. Even some of the Whitmore business associates joined in, their chuckles oiling the wheels of social hierarchy. I felt the wine seeping through to my skin, warm and sticky. My hands remained folded in my lap, now damp with Harold's deliberate insult. Michael had half risen from his seat at the main table, his face flushed, but Emily's hand on his arm pulled him back down. He wouldn't defend me. He never did. "Don't worry about it," I said quietly, reaching for my napkin. "Accidents happen." "Accidents," Harold repeated, savoring the word. "Yes, that's what you are. Isn't it an accident in our family tree? But Michael's made his choice, and we Whitmores honor family, even the disappointing additions." He patted my shoulder with false sympathy, his palm heavy and possessive, leaving a moment later to rejoin his circle of sycophants. The band resumed playing. Conversations gradually restarted, but I remained frozen, the wine cooling against my thighs. A server appeared with club soda and fresh napkins, her eyes sympathetic but professional. "Can I help you to the ladies' room, ma'am?" "In a moment," I said, my voice steadier than my pulse. I watched Harold work the room, shaking hands and slapping backs, the king of his diminished kingdom. He had no idea that 3 years ago, I'd started buying shares in his company through shell corporations. He didn't know about the patents, the government contracts, the technology that would revolutionize data security. He saw a widow in a wine-stained dress, someone to humiliate for sport. The fire that had been embers in my chest since Daniel's death suddenly roared to life. I'd spent years being underestimated, dismissed, humiliated in small ways and large. But tonight was different. Tonight. Harold Whitmore had made a choice that would cost him everything. I stood slowly, the wine-soaked fabric clinging uncomfortably to my legs. Heads turned again, waiting to see if I'd make a scene, run crying from the room. Instead, I walked steadily toward the exit, my ruined dress a badge of war they didn't yet understand. Behind me, the party continued, oblivious to the shift that had just occurred. In their world of stock portfolios and country clubs, they couldn't fathom that the quiet widow they'd just humiliated held the keys to their kingdom. And tonight, I was finally ready to use them. The taxi driver kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror during the ride back to my hotel, probably wondering about the wine stain spreading across my dress like a map of humiliation. I stared out at Charleston's gaslit streets, my mind drifting to another night. 9 years ago, when everything changed. Daniel and I had been working 18-hour days in our cramped garage in Mountain View, California. We weren't trying to change the world, we just wanted to solve a problem. Companies were hemorrhaging money from data breaches, and Daniel had an idea for an encryption system that would make corporate data virtually unhackable. I handled the business side while he coded through the night, surviving on takeout Thai food and the dream of something bigger. The breakthrough came at 3:45 a.m. on a Tuesday. Daniel had cracked at a revolutionary approach to layered encryption that would become the foundation of our patent. We danced in that garage, laughing like kids, not knowing that in 18 months, a drunk driver would run a red light and take him from me forever. The lawyers had been vultures afterward, circling what they assumed was a worthless startup. Michael was 24 then, fresh out of business school, embarrassed by his parents' modest success. He'd actually suggested I sell the patent rights for whatever you can get. Mom, Dad's gone. Just move on. But I didn't sell. I couldn't. Instead, I disappeared into the background. I let everyone believe I'd taken a data entry job at a small financial firm in Charlotte, technically true, since I'd created the firm myself as a front. Data Nova Systems officially belonged to a complex web of holding companies registered in Delaware, with anonymous shareholders in the Caymans. The patent Daniel died protecting became the cornerstone of a security empire that now protected Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, and 3 major banks. $74 million. That was my current net worth as of last quarter, though it fluctuated with the market. Most of it remained tied up in investments, real estate, and the company itself. I lived modestly, drove a 5-year-old Honda, and let the Whitmores believe I shopped at discount stores and barely scraped by on a secretary's salary. The deception hadn't started as revenge, it was survival. After Daniel's death, I couldn't bear the thought of his life's work becoming cocktail party conversation, reduced to a number in someone else's portfolio. So I built in silence, hiring brilliant minds who'd never met me face to face, conducting everything through encrypted communications and trusted intermediaries. My lawyer, Jonathan Peters, was one of 3 people who knew the truth. He'd helped structure the corporate maze that kept my identity hidden. You could buy and sell Harold Whitmore 3 times over, he'd told me last month during our quarterly review. Why do you let them treat you this way? I hadn't had an answer then. Pride, maybe, or cowardice. Or perhaps I'd been waiting for them to see me as family without the money, to value me as Michael's mother, as a person worthy of basic respect. Tonight had shattered that delusion. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the encrypted files I kept on cloud storage. There it was, the investment analysis I'd commissioned 2 years ago on Whitmore Industries. Harold's commercial real estate empire looked impressive from the outside, all glass towers and marina developments. But the foundation was rotting. Over-leveraged properties, balloon payments coming due, construction costs hemorrhaging on his latest vanity project, a 40-story mixed-use complex in downtown Charleston. What Harold didn't know was that 18 months ago, through a series of shell companies, I'd been quietly buying up his debt. Every time a loan was packaged and resold, my investment firms were there, accumulating pieces of Whitmore Industries like a chess player positioning for checkmate. I now controlled 47% of his corporate debt through various holdings. But there was more. 6 months ago, during a moment of desperation, Harold had taken a private loan from what he believed was a Hong Kong investment group, $20 million at an attractive rate, with one caveat: any default would trigger immediate transfer of controlling interest in Whitmore Industries. That Hong Kong group was mine. The irony was delicious. Harold had literally borrowed money from the woman he'd just humiliated, the accident in his family tree. Every payment he made enriched me further, and he was already 60 days behind on his latest installment, though my firms had graciously granted an extension. I opened my laptop in the hotel room, still wearing the wine-stained dress like armor. The numbers glowed on the screen: profit margins, debt ratios, market projections. Harold's empire existed at my discretion. One phone call to Jonathan, and I could call in the loans, trigger the default clause, and watch 50 years of Whitmore legacy crumble. But that would be too simple, too clean. No. Harold deserved to know exactly who had destroyed him. He deserved to see my face when his kingdom became mine, to understand that the woman he'd dismissed as worthless had been playing a longer, deeper game than his provincial mind could comprehend. I pulled up the DataNova Systems interface, looking at the next quarter's projections. We were about to announce a breakthrough that would triple our valuation: quantum encrypted cloud storage that would revolutionize cybersecurity. The patents were all in my name. Daniel's legacy finally ready to change the world. The wine had dried to a rusty stain across my dress. I stood before the hotel mirror, studying the woman Harold Whitmore had chosen to humiliate. She looked tired, ordinary, defeated. But appearances, I'd learned, were the ultimate deception. Tomorrow, I would begin the careful dismantling of Harold Whitmore's world, not with anger or haste, but with the methodical precision Daniel had taught me in those long garage nights. Every move calculated, every consequence considered. Harold thought he'd spilled wine on a nobody. He was about to learn he'd declared war on an empire. The morning after the wedding, I returned to Charlotte and my ordinary life, or what everyone believed was my ordinary life. The small financial firm where I supposedly worked was real enough, occupying the 12th floor of a nondescript office building downtown. I even had a desk there, complete with family photos and a coffee mug that read, "World's Best Mom," that Michael had given me years ago, back when he still cared about such things. My assistant, Patricia, was one of my 3 confidants. She managed my public persona with remarkable efficiency, ensuring anyone who checked would find Claire Donovan, data analyst, earning $62,000 a year, driving her Honda Accord, living in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Myers Park. "How was the wedding?" Patricia asked when I arrived that morning, though her expression suggested she already knew. "Educational," I replied, settling into my desk. Through the glass partition, I could see the real operations center where a team of analysts monitored DataNova's global operations. They thought they worked for a subsidiary of a Hong Kong conglomerate. The levels of separation I'd built would impress even the NSA. My phone buzzed. Michael. "Mom, I heard what happened last night. Emily's father, he shouldn't have done that." I noticed he couldn't bring himself to apologize directly, couldn't quite say the words that would position him against his new family. "It's fine, sweetheart. These things happen. Maybe you could, I don't know, maybe try harder to fit in. Emily says you always seem so distant at family gatherings." The knife twisted a little deeper. "I'll keep that in mind." After I hung up, I stared at the phone for a long moment. My son had become a stranger, seduced by the Whitmore money and status, transformed into someone who blamed his mother for not fitting in with people who treated her like dirt. The irony was suffocating. Michael worked as a junior executive at Whitmore Industries, earning $120,000 a year and thinking himself successful. His trust fund from Daniel, which I'd carefully limited to seem modest, paid out another $40,000 annually. He lived in a downtown condo owned by Harold, drove a BMW leased by the company, and wore suits bought with Emily's credit cards. He had no idea his mother's companies held patents worth more than the entire Whitmore portfolio. No idea that the small inheritance I'd claimed from Daniel was actually a technological goldmine that generated 8 figures annually in licensing fees alone. At lunch, I met Jonathan at a discreet restaurant in Dilworth. He slid a folder across the table paperwork I'd requested that morning. "The Whitmore debt portfolio," he said quietly. "You now control 51% through various holdings. The Hong Kong loan comes due in 30 days. They're not going to make it." I studied the numbers while picking at a Caesar salad. "What about their attempts to refinance? Every major bank has turned them down. They're over-leveraged by 300%. That new tower downtown is bleeding them dry. Construction delays, cost overruns, and now the anchor tenant pulled out." I sipped my water. "And if someone were to call in these loans," Jonathan's expression was carefully neutral, "immediate bankruptcy. The company would go into receivership. Assets would be liquidated to pay creditors, primarily you, though they wouldn't know that. Harold would lose everything: the house, the yacht, the properties, all of it. The family trust, also pledged as collateral, Vivian's charity foundations, Emily's boutiques, even the country club membership, everything tied to Whitmore Industries would evaporate." I thought about Emily's sneer last night, her diamond necklace catching the light as she laughed at my humiliation, Vivian's careful distance, as if poverty might be contagious, and Harold, always Harold, with his burgundy wine and booming laugh. "Not yet," I said. "I want him to know who's doing this. I want him to understand." That afternoon, back at my facade of an office, I received an unexpected visitor. Vivian Whitmore stood in my small reception area, looking as out of place as a peacock in a parking lot. Her Chanel suit probably cost more than my supposed monthly salary. "Claire," she said, her tone suggesting she was doing me an enormous favor by remembering my name. "Might we speak privately?" I led her to my modest office, noting how her eyes cataloged every detail: the small space, the dated furniture, the view of an air conditioning unit on the opposite building. "I wanted to apologize for Harold's behavior last night," she said, though her expression suggested she'd rather swallow glass. "He'd had too much to drink. You understand?" "Of course." She shifted uncomfortably. "Michael is very important to our family. We wouldn't want any unpleasantness to affect that relationship." Translation: "Don't make a fuss. Don't embarrass us. Know your place. I'm also here about another matter," she continued. "The family is organizing a charity auction next month. For the Children's Hospital. We thought, that is. Emily suggested you might want to contribute something, perhaps some homemade jewelry or crafts. Something heartfelt rather than expensive. We want all family members to participate. Homemade crafts. They wanted me to contribute my little poverty crafts to their charity auction, where Vivian's friends would bid on them out of pity. Another opportunity to demonstrate my lower status. "I'll see what I can do," I said mildly. After she left, trailing perfume and condescension, I made a decision. I called Jonathan. "Remember that Basquiat painting I bought at auction last year through the Swiss account? The one worth $12 million. Have it delivered to the Whitmore charity auction. Anonymous donation. Make sure it arrives the day of the event. Claire, that's... Also, schedule a meeting with Harold for next week. Tell him a potential investor wants to discuss the refinancing. Set it at the Ritz-Carlton, the penthouse conference room. He'll jump at it. He's desperate." "I know," I said, looking out at the city Harold thought he owned. "That's what I'm counting on." The wine stain had washed out of my dress, but the memory remained, sharp and clear as crystal. They all thought they knew me, the poor widow, the charity case, the embarrassment to be tolerated and occasionally humiliated for sport. Next week, Harold would walk into that conference room expecting salvation. Instead, he'd find me. The night before my meeting with Harold, I couldn't sleep. I stood on my apartment balcony at 2:30 a.m., looking out at the Charlotte skyline, rehearsing what I would say. The city lights blurred through the wine glass I held not from tears, but from the weight of anticipation. My laptop sat open on the kitchen counter, displaying the labyrinth of holdings I'd constructed. Through 17 different shell companies, investment funds, and private equity firms, I had become Harold Whitmore's largest creditor. The documentation was beautiful in its complexity, entirely legal, completely untraceable to Claire Donovan, the nobody widow. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, not the discount store clothes they expected, but a simple black Armani suit I'd bought years ago in San Francisco, tailored to perfection. Understated wealth that Harold's untrained eye would dismiss as trying too hard. The shoes were Louboutins, though I'd had the red soles painted black, details that mattered only to me. Jonathan had done his job perfectly. Harold believed he was meeting representatives from Apex Global Investments, a Singapore-based firm interested in Charleston real estate. What he didn't know was that Apex Global was mine, created 18 months ago for exactly this purpose. I arrived at the Ritz-Carlton an hour early, taking the executive elevator to the penthouse conference room. The space was magnificent, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, a table that could seat 20, fresh orchids in crystal vases. I'd paid for the room rental in cash, another ghost transaction in a paper trail that led nowhere. Patricia had positioned the documents strategically across the table. Loan agreements, debt consolidation paperwork, default notices held in abeyance, the evidence of Harold's empire's decay, spread out like autopsy photos. At exactly 10 a.m., Harold burst through the door with his typical bluster, followed by 2 lawyers and his CFO. Marcus Webb, a nervous man who knew exactly how dire their situation was. "Gentlemen," Harold boomed, not seeing me yet as I stood by the windows. "I hope you're ready to make some real money in Charleston real estate. We're talking about opportunities that—" He stopped mid-sentence when I turned around. The confusion on his face was exquisite. "Claire, what are you? Is this some kind of joke? We're here for an important meeting." "Yes," I said quietly. "You are?" "Security." Harold barked at no one in particular. "There's been some mistake. My son's mother-in-law seems to be confused about—" "Sit down, Harold." Something in my voice made him pause. Maybe it was the absence of deference, the lack of apology. I moved to the table, picking up the top document. Loan agreement dated January 15th. $20 million from Hong Kong Capital Partners to Whitmore Industries, 60 days past due, default interest accruing at 22% annually. Marcus Webb's face went white. He recognized the document. I picked up another. Bridge loan from Meridian Investments, March 10th, $12 million. Payment missed. Another. Construction financing from Atlas Development Group, $47 million. In technical default due to failure to maintain required debt ratios. How did you— These are confidential. They're mine. I let the words hang in the air. Every loan, every debt, every noose you've tied around your company's neck. Mine. Harold laughed, but it sounded forced. That's impossible. You work data entry. You drive a Honda. You wore a $50 dress to my daughter's wedding. The dress was actually from Target. $35. Very comfortable. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down. Though I could have worn the Vera Wang I bought for Daniel's funeral, or the Oscar de la Renta from the Data Nova IPO celebration, but those didn't seem appropriate for people who would spill wine on them. Marcus was frantically flipping through the documents, his hands shaking. "Sir, these signatures, the holding companies, it's all legitimate. Whoever controls these entities owns 51% of our debt. 53%, actually. I corrected. I bought another 2% this morning when your German investors panic sold. Harold's face had progressed from red to purple. This is blackmail. Extortion. I'll sue. For what investing in your company believing in the great Harold Whitmore's vision? I pulled out my phone, showed him a screenshot. By the way, your wife was kind enough to visit me this week. She invited me to contribute my crafts to your charity auction. So I did. The screenshot showed the auction listing, anonymous donation Jean-Michel Basquiat, untitled Devil, 1982, estimated value $12 million. Harold's lawyer finally spoke up. What do you want? I stood, walking to the windows, making them wait. The harbor stretched out below, boats cutting white lines through blue water. Somewhere down there was Harold's yacht, the Southern Pride, bought with borrowed money he could never repay. What I wanted, I said finally, was to be treated with basic human dignity, to attend my son's wedding without being humiliated, to be acknowledged as family, not furniture. I turned back to them. But that ship has sailed, hasn't it? Harold, just like your solvency. Name your price, Harold said through gritted teeth. My price. I laughed, and it felt foreign in my throat. Ha, Harold, you don't have anything left to pay with. Your house is mortgaged 3 times over. Your yacht is collateral. Your wife's jewelry is leased. Even your country club membership, which you've lorded over everyone for decades, is paid for by the company that I now control. I gathered my papers, sliding them into a leather portfolio worth more than Harold's monthly mortgage payment, not that he'd recognize it. You have 72 hours to make the Hong Kong payment, full amount plus accrued interest. That's $31.7 million. That's impossible. You know we can't. Then Whitmore Industries goes into receivership Monday morning. Your personal guarantees will be called. Bankruptcy proceedings will begin. I paused at the door. Oh, and Harold, that wine you spilled on me was a 2016 Chateau Margaux, $700 a bottle. Rather wasteful, don't you think? As I waited for the elevator, I heard Harold shouting, cursing, threatening lawsuits and violence in equal measure. But beneath the rage was something else fierce. The kind that comes when you realize the person you stepped on was actually standing above you all along. The first call came at 6:15 p.m. That same day. Harold, his voice stripped of its usual arrogance, trying to negotiate. I let it go to voicemail. The second call, 10 minutes later, was from Michael. Mom, what did you do? His voice was shaking. Harold is losing his mind. He says you're trying to destroy his company. Emily's in tears. This has to be some misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I said calmly, stirring pasta on my stove. I invested in Harold's company. Now those investments are coming due. Invested, Mom. You don't have. Where would you even get that kind of money? From your father. Dad's life insurance was barely enough to. Your father was a genius. Michael, you knew that once, before the Whitmores convinced you he was just a failed tech dreamer who died broke. I turned off the burner. Every line of code he wrote, every patent he filed, every sleepless night in that garage, it all meant something. Datanova Systems processes 3 billion transactions daily. Fortune 500 companies pay millions for our encryption services. Silence. Then, you're lying. Check the patent office. Your father's name is on every filing. Mine is on the current ownership documents. But you said you told me you worked data entry. You assumed. You all assumed. And I let you. Because I wanted to see if any of you would value me without the money. If your new family would treat me as human without knowing my net worth. Mom, please. Emily's pregnant. We just found out yesterday. If Harold loses the company, we lose everything. The condo, the cars. The condo Harold owns, the cars Harold leases, the life Harold subsidizes in exchange for your loyalty. My voice hardened. Tell me, Michael, when he poured wine on me at your wedding, did you think about your pregnant wife then? When Emily laughed, "Did you consider your future child?" "That was just Harold had too much to drink." "Stop." I set down my wooden spoon. "You're about to be a father. Maybe it's time you learned to stand on your own feet instead of kneeling at Harold's." I hung up and turned my phone to silent. Within minutes, it lit up with a cascade of messages. Vivian, Emily, Harold's lawyers, even Emily's sister from San Francisco, suddenly interested in reconnecting. By 8 p.m., Vivian appeared at my apartment. The doorman called up, confused by the elegant woman insisting she needed to see me immediately. I let her up, curious about what approach she'd take. She entered my apartment and stopped short. The space was modest, but filled with things she'd never noticed during her few previous visits, an original Rothko sketch above the fireplace, first edition books in climate-controlled cases, a Steuben glass collection that caught the evening light. "This isn't possible," she whispered, recognizing quality when she saw it. "Tea," I offered. She sat on my sofa, a custom piece from a Milan designer, though she wouldn't know that, and tried to compose herself. Gone was the condescension, replaced by desperate calculation. "Claire, we're family," she began. "Since when? I know we haven't always been warm, but surely you wouldn't destroy your son's future over petty grievances." "Petty," I poured hot water over tea leaves. "Your husband humiliated me in front of 200 guests. You've excluded me from family portraits. Emily refers to me as Michael's birth mother, as if I'm a surrogate who overstayed her welcome." "Emily's pregnant," Vivian said, playing what she thought was her trump card. "Congratulations. I hope you'll be a better grandmother than you've been a mother-in-law." Her face crumpled. "Please, I'm begging you. Harold built this company from nothing. It's his life's work." "No, Vivian. Harold inherited the company from his father, who built it from nothing. Harold leveraged it into the ground funding his ego. There's a difference." "What do you want?" "An apology. You'll have it. A place in the family done. Money. You can't give me money you don't have." I handed her the tea. "And I don't want your conditional acceptance. I wanted genuine respect. But that window closed when your husband decided to mark his territory with a wine bottle. 72 hours isn't enough time. You know it isn't. I've known that for 6 months, when I structured the loans this way." She stared at me. This woman who'd ruled Charleston society for 30 years, finally understanding she'd been outsmarted by someone she'd considered beneath notice. "There might be one option," I said slowly, watching hope flicker in her eyes. "Harold could sign over his shares in Whitmore Industries to me, voluntarily, before the default triggers. That would allow me to restructure the debt, possibly save the company. But he'd lose control. He's going to lose everything anyway. This way, you might keep your house, maybe one car. Certainly more than bankruptcy would leave you." Vivian's hands shook as she set down the teacup. "He'll never agree. His pride is about to become very expensive." I stood, signaling the conversation was over. "The offer stands until 9 a.m. Monday. After that, the banks open, the defaults trigger, and Harold Whitmore becomes a cautionary tale told at country clubs he can no longer afford to enter." At the door, she turned back. "You planned this. All of it. For how long?" "Since the day Michael introduced me to your family and Harold asked if I was the cleaning lady." She left without another word. I watched from my window as her Bentley pulled away, probably heading home to explain to Harold that his kingdom had been conquered by the woman he'd dismissed as worthless. My phone showed 47 missed calls. I deleted them all and opened my laptop instead. The Data Nova quarterly report glowed on the screen. Tomorrow, we'd announce a 40% increase in revenue and a new government contract worth $200 million. But tonight, I sat in my modest apartment, surrounded by treasures the Whitmores had never bothered to notice, and waited for Harold's empire to fall. Saturday morning arrived with a storm, rain lashing against my windows as if nature itself had chosen sides. By 11 a.m., my doorman called up again. Harold Whitmore was in the lobby, demanding to see me. I could have refused. Should have. Perhaps. But I wanted to look him in the eye one more time. This man who'd wielded his wealth like a weapon against anyone he deemed inferior. He entered my apartment like a hurricane, soaking wet, his usual polish completely abandoned. His eyes were bloodshot, his silver hair disheveled, and I could smell whiskey despite the early hour. "You vindictive bitch," he snarled, slamming the door behind him. I remained seated, sipping my coffee. "Good morning to you too, Harold. Don't play games with me." He stalked forward, and for a moment, I wondered if he might actually become violent. "You've destroyed everything, 40 years of building, and you've destroyed it in a week. You destroyed yourself. I just own the debt that proves it." He laughed bitterly, pulling out a bottle of Macallan from his coat already half empty. "You think you've won. You think taking my company makes you somebody. I've always been somebody. You just couldn't see it through your prejudice." "Prejudice?" He took a swig directly from the bottle. "You were nothing when Michael brought you around. A widow playing at business, pretending Daniel's tinkering meant something. Daniel's tinkering just secured a Pentagon contract worth more than your entire company's ever been worth." I stood, walking to my window. "But you couldn't see that. All you saw was a woman without the right pedigree, the right connections, the right clothes. So this is revenge for a spilled glass of wine. No, Harold, it's justice. For 3 years of dismissive comments, for being excluded from family photos, for every time you made Michael choose between his mother and your money." I turned to face him. "The wine was just the final insult that made me stop protecting you from yourself." He stumbled to my couch, collapsing into it. "Vivian says you offered a deal." "I did. Sign over your shares. I'll restructure the debt, keep the company alive. You'll lose control, but keep some dignity." "Dignity," he spat the word. "You want me to hand over my father's company to you. Your father's company died years ago when you leveraged it into a house of cards. What exists now is a debt-riddled shell wearing the Whitmore name like a costume." Harold pulled out a folder from his coat, wet and wrinkled. "The transfer papers. Marcus drew them up. He threw them on my coffee table. But I want something in return. You're not in a position to negotiate. I want you to tell Michael the truth. All of it. Let him know his mother is a lying, manipulative. I'll tell him everything, including how his father-in-law treated me, including how his wife laughed, including how he chose their money over his mother's dignity." Harold's hand trembled as he reached for a pen. "You know what the worst part is? If you'd just shown us the money from the beginning, none of this would have happened. We would have respected you. That's exactly why I didn't show you. Respect that has to be purchased isn't respect at all." He signed the papers, his signature barely legible. "There, it's done. Whitmore Industries is yours. 4 generations of legacy, gone to a nobody from California. A nobody who now owns everything you used to define yourself." I picked up the papers, checking the signatures. "Your father would be ashamed of what you did with his legacy. But maybe I can restore it to something worthwhile." Harold stood unsteadily. "We're ruined. You know that, really ruined. The house is mortgaged to the company, the cars, the yacht, even Vivian's jewelry, all collateral. The jewelry is fake, by the way. Vivian sold the real pieces 2 years ago to cover your gambling debts in Atlantic City." His face went white. "How could you possibly? I own the pawn shop she sold them to. Well, through another holding company. I bought them back. Actually, they're in a safety deposit box at Bank of America. Consider them a severance package enough to keep you comfortable if you're smart about it." For the first time since he'd arrived, Harold looked truly broken. "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm not you. Harold, I don't need to destroy people to feel powerful. I just needed you to understand that your kingdom was always built on sand, and I was the tide you never saw coming." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "Michael will hate you for this." "Maybe, but someday, when he's teaching his own child about respect and dignity, maybe he'll understand that his mother valued principles over profit. that she could have bought his love with money but wanted to earn it with truth. You're a fool if you think that's how the world works. I'm worth $74 million. Harold, I'd say my way works just fine. He left then, the door closing with a soft click that sounded like an ending. I stood in my apartment, holding the papers that made me the owner of Whitmore Industries, and felt empty. Not satisfied, not victorious. Just empty. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. Dad told me everything. How could you? I typed back, come see me tomorrow. Bring Emily. It's time you knew who your father really was and who your mother really is. Outside, the storm was breaking, sunlight piercing through the clouds in sharp, golden rays. Somewhere in Charleston, Harold Whitmore was going home to explain to his wife that they now worked for the woman they'd treated like trash. But I wasn't thinking about them anymore. I was thinking about Daniel, about garage nights and encrypted dreams, about a legacy that was always about more than money. Tomorrow, I'd have to face my son. Tonight, I sat with the ghosts of who we all used to be, before money and pride poisoned everything we touched. Sunday evening arrived with unexpected violence. Harold appeared at my penthouse, not my modest apartment, but the actual penthouse I owned in the Carillon Tower, the one nobody knew about. Somehow, he'd done his homework. Security called up at 8:45 p.m. Mrs. Donovan, there's a Harold Whitmore here. He's agitated. Should we call the police? Send him up, I said, setting aside the Data Nova expansion proposals I'd been reviewing. He burst through my door the moment I opened it, wild-eyed and desperate. The composed businessman was gone, replaced by something feral. His coat reeked of bourbon, and his hands shook with barely contained rage. You think money makes you family, he roared, stumbling into my living room. The space was everything my other apartment wasn't floor-to-ceiling windows, marble floors, a Chihuly sculpture casting rainbow shadows on the walls. Harold, you're drunk. Damn right I'm drunk. My whole life is gone. Everything. He grabbed a crystal decanter from my bar, not to pour a drink, but to wave it like a weapon. But you know what I figured out. You're just as empty as the rest of us. Sitting here in your tower, pulling strings, playing God with other people's lives. I didn't play God. I just stopped playing victim. He laughed, harsh and broken. Victim. You want to talk about victims. My father built that company with his bare hands, came from nothing, worked 18-hour days, missed my childhood building something that mattered. And you destroyed it with greed and ego. I tried to make it bigger. I tried to matter. The decanter slipped from his hand, shattering on the marble. Do you know what it's like? Growing up in his shadow, Theodore Whitmore. The legend everything I did was compared to him. Never good enough, never smart enough, never enough. I reached for paper towels, calmly cleaning up the broken crystal. So you compensated by belittling everyone else. I was protecting what was mine. No, Harold. You were so insecure about your own worth that you needed to diminish others to feel valuable. I stood, facing him directly. That night at the wedding, when you spilled wine on me, what were you protecting then? His face crumpled. Michael was supposed to marry better, someone with breeding, with status, not some tech widow from California. You were supposed to be grateful we even acknowledged you. I was grateful. Grateful you showed me exactly who you were. Harold sank into my leather chair, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. The transfer papers were filed yesterday. It's official. You own everything. I know. The board wants me gone. My own board. People I've known for 20 years. They want me out completely. They want the company to survive. With me in control. It will... He pulled out a thick folder from his coat, laying it on my coffee table with trembling hands. I had a private investigator look into you, into Daniel, into everything. I tensed but kept my expression neutral. Your husband was brilliant, Harold said quietly. The patents, the innovations, the contracts you've secured, it's all here. Data Nova is worth almost $500 million. The technology is revolutionary. Daniel was always ahead of his time. And you built this empire while we thought you were filing reports and answering phones. He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something like respect in his eyes. You could have crushed us years ago. I didn't want to crush anyone. I wanted to be invisible until you forced me to be seen. Harold pulled out another document older, yellowed at the edges. I found something else. The original incorporation papers for Whitmore Industries. Did you know your maiden name was Whitmore? I froze. Your great-grandfather, James Whitmore. My grandfather, Theodore's brother. He left the company in 1952 over a dispute about expansion, took his shares and disappeared to California. Harold's laugh was bitter. We're family, Claire. Actual blood family. Third cousins or something like that. The room spun slightly. I sat down across from him, processing this impossible information. You didn't know, he said, seeing my shock. God, you didn't know. You destroyed your own family's legacy without even knowing it was yours. No, I said slowly, understanding, crystallizing. I saved it. From you. Harold stood abruptly, swaying slightly. I came here to hurt you, to tell you something that would destroy you the way you destroyed me. But this is almost poetic. A Whitmore taking back what a Whitmore built, from a Whitmore who destroyed it. He moved toward the door, then turned back. Your son called me this afternoon, begging me to forgive you, to work something out. He doesn't understand that it's too late. We're all just pieces on your board now. Michael called you. He loves you, you know, despite everything, despite choosing us over you every time. He kept your picture in his office, the one from his college graduation. Emily made him move it to a drawer, but he kept it. Harold, enjoy your victory. Claire, you've earned it. But remember, every empire built on revenge eventually eats itself. He paused at the door. Oh, in that charity auction your Basquiat sold for $18 million. Anonymous buyer. Funny thing, though the money was wired from a Data Nova subsidiary account. I stared at him. You knew. I figured it out this morning. You bought your own donation to make the auction a success, to save face for Vivian one last time. His smile was sad. Maybe you're more Whitmore than either of us realized. We always did protect the family name, even when we hated each other. He left then, and I stood in my penthouse surrounded by everything money could buy, holding the revelation that I'd been a Whitmore all along. The irony was suffocating. I'd fought so hard to earn their respect, never knowing I'd had a birthright to their legacy. I walked to my window, looking out at Charleston's lights, and wondered if Daniel had known, if he'd laughed at the cosmic joke of it all. A Whitmore married to a tech genius, building an empire to eventually reclaim what was always hers. Tomorrow, I'd face Michael and Emily. Tomorrow, I'd decide what to do with Whitmore Industries. But tonight, I sat with the ghost of family ties I'd never known existed, and the hollow victory of defeating relatives who'd never recognized me as their own. Monday morning came crisp and clear, the kind of Charleston day that makes you forget storms ever existed. The boardroom at Whitmore Industries, my boardroom now filled with nervous executives, lawyers, and financial advisors, all waiting to see what Claire Donovan would do with their futures. I stood at the head of the table where Harold had once held court, wearing a simple black dress and my mother's pearl necklace, the only valuable thing I'd kept visible all these years. Effective immediately, I began. Whitmore Industries will undergo restructuring, not bankruptcy, not liquidation, but transformation. Marcus Webb, the CFO, raised his hand tentatively. Mrs. Donovan, the debt obligations have been restructured through Data Nova's financial division. We're merging the companies. Whitmore's real estate expertise combined with Data Nova's technology will create smart buildings, integrated security systems, and sustainable developments that will revolutionize the industry. The room buzzed with surprised murmurs. They'd expected a bloodbath, not a resurrection. Harold Whitmore will retain an advisory role, I continued, watching shock ripple through the room. His knowledge of Charleston real estate is invaluable. Vivian will head our new charitable foundation, funded with 10% of annual profits, and Michael, my son, will oversee the integration process, if he accepts. The door opened. Michael stood there with Emily, both looking haggard. Emily's pregnancy was showing now, a small bump under her designer dress. "Mom," Michael said, his voice rough. "Can we talk?" I nodded to the board. "We'll reconvene this afternoon." In my new office, Harold's former sanctuary of mahogany and leather, my son looked like a stranger. Emily sat beside him, clutching his hand. "Harold told us everything," Michael said. "About Dad's patents, about Data Nova, about the family connection. Is it true?" "Every word. You let me think we were poor. You let me be ashamed of you." "No, Michael, I let you show me who you were, and you chose them, every time." Emily spoke for the first time. "We're sorry. I'm sorry. The way we treated you was inexcusable." I studied her face, looking for the mockery, the calculation. Instead, I found genuine remorse. "I don't want apologies," I said. "I want change. Your child, my grandchild, deserves better than a family built on prejudice and greed." Michael stood, pacing to the window. "You destroyed Harold." "Harold destroyed himself. I just held up a mirror." "And now you own everything." "Now I own the chance to rebuild it correctly." I moved beside him, looking out at the city. "Your father would have loved this view." "He always said the best revenge against those who doubt you is building something they could never imagine." "Is that what this was, revenge?" "At first, but revenge is empty." "Michael, I learned that when Harold stood in my penthouse, broken and drunk, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no joy, just nothing." Emily joined us at the window. "What happens now?" "That depends on you. You can take your trust funds and leave, start fresh somewhere else, or you can stay and help build something meaningful. But if you stay, the old ways die today. No more hierarchy based on bank accounts. No more treating people as less than human because they seem to have less money." Michael turned to me, and for the first time in years, I saw the boy who used to call me after nightmares, who brought me dandelions and called them flowers. "Mom, I'm sorry. Not because you have money, but because I forgot who you were, who Dad was. I got so caught up in the Whitmore show that I forgot we were already something special." I pulled him into a hug, feeling Emily's hand tentatively touch my shoulder. "Your father used to say that family isn't about blood or money, it's about choosing each other, every day, especially when it's hard." I pulled back, looking at both of them. "So I'm choosing to forgive, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. We rebuild, but we rebuild differently." The papers would run the story for weeks. Tech Widow's Revenge, the $74 million secret, the fall of the Whitmore dynasty. But they missed the real story, a family so broken by pride and greed that it took destruction to find redemption. 6 months later, at my grandchild's baptism, Harold stood as godfather. He was sober, humbled, working hard to earn his advisory role. Vivian had thrown herself into the foundation, discovering a purpose beyond social climbing. Emily had started a program providing business training to young mothers, using her own story of privilege and blindness as a cautionary tale. And Michael. He stood beside me at Data Nova's IPO when we went public at a $2 billion valuation. "Dad would be proud," he said, and meant it. The wine stain never really came out of that navy dress. I had it framed, hung in my office as a reminder. Sometimes the smallest insults open the biggest doors. Sometimes you have to lose everything: respect, dignity, family, to discover you had the power to take it all back and more. Harold was wrong about one thing. Empires built on revenge do eat themselves. But from those ashes, if you're brave enough, you can build something better, something real, something that would make a brilliant man coding in a garage smile and say, "That's my girl." My name is Claire Donovan Whitmore now, I reclaimed both parts of my heritage, the love that built me and the legacy I never knew was mine. And every morning, when I walk into Whitmore Data Nova Industries, past the portrait of Theodore Whitmore and the photograph of Daniel Donovan hanging side by side, I remember that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's transformation. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let me know your thoughts. What would you have done in my position? Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that make us question our own choices.